I'm from the Parks Department meetings. So.
1 second.
Recording in progress.
Vote on Ordinance March 6, 2023, and the time is 5:36. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Chairman Esposito.
Present.
Vice Chairwoman Peterson. Present. Councilwoman Harris.
Present.
Councilwoman Vargas.
Present.
Councilor Rogers is absent. There are 4 present and 1 absent. We have 4.
Thank you. Well, we begin, I'd like to announce it, so it's in the round for policy office. Thank you for being here. First item on the agenda, Madam Clerk.
An ordinance amending chapter 16, offenses and miscellaneous provisions, article 11, discrimination, section 16 to 54, definitions of the Providence Code of Ordinance.
Thank you. We have one get to present on this item. The main sponsor is Councilman Goldberg.
Mr. Chairman, before we begin, can you just acknowledge that Councilor Bryce is joining the meeting?
Welcome. Go ahead, Councilman Goldberg.
Great, thank you, Chairman. So I'm here today to talk a little bit more about the impetus of this particular piece of legislation and why we brought it forward. So in the state legislature, there are a number of legislators that are working on codifying a law around hair discrimination, and it's called the Crown Act. It's a piece of state legislation, but there's also legislation at the federal level. And essentially what it does is it bans discrimination based on protective hairstyles that are commonly or historically associated with race, including braids, locks, twists, tight coils or curls, cornrows, bantu knots, afros, and head wraps. The reason why this is particularly important is because we've seen just historically that folks who exhibit sometimes those hairstyles may be treated differently than their colleagues based on those cultural hairstyles. And from the city of Philadelphia to the state of Massachusetts to the U.S. House of Representatives, legislation prohibiting employers from discriminating based on a person's hair texture or style have been implemented in these places. And this Crown Act law essentially prohibits, again, this workplace discrimination related to styles and textures commonly associated with a particular race or national origin. A number of cities, counties, and territories have also enacted their own ordinances inspired by state legislation, but also federal legislation. Again, there's some state legislation that's passed. There isn't any federal statute on this. So really it's up to states and cities and towns to be able to codify this in their local ordinances. And you've got places like Arizona, Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Michigan, and the list goes on that have enacted what we call the Crown Act. So we're hoping to get this piece of legislation passed. And I also want to point to another clause within this proposed amendment of the ordinance, which would be section P, which is sexual orientation, meaning that you not discriminate against someone based on a person's actual or perceived heterosexuality, bisexuality, or homosexuality. And so this is a way that we can make our city more inclusive, and we believe that because there isn't a national piece of legislation that protects these classes, having something codified at the local level, making sure that we're leading the charge in modeling inclusivity in our municipality. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So the two sections that you're looking to amend is E and also P, right? You'll add it.
Yes.
Anyone else?
Yeah,
Rita Harris.
is this, did you just say that at a state level, this is all ordinance that they are working as well?
It is, yes, it's a state law that has been introduced, but it hasn't passed, and it needs to pass both chambers, the House and Senate. And what we have seen in other places, is if there's a city, particularly a large city, a capital city that leads the way and is a model, it can inspire legislation also at the state level. So basically, we're trying to codify this at the local level so that we have these protections at the municipal level with hopes that will inspire and get our federal or state, legislators to act. And eventually, our hope is that when more states and more municipalities adopt this, it will expand federally. So that's the end goal, and then we would need an ordinance like this because we'd be protected by federal statutes.
Mr. Chair,
Absolutely. Go ahead.
is there any examples of people who have brought testimonies that they have been discriminated because they're here?
Yeah, I think
They're here?
as people of color, I'm sure we have our own individual stories. I think when we look at the impetus around just Crown Acts in states and municipalities, but even federally, the reason why this legislation has been brought forth is because historically, based on people's hairstyles, unfortunately, in our country, people have been discriminated against. So it's critical that we're explicit about this. And as a city of Providence, we are not immune to this kind of discrimination. It happens everywhere. And in order to ensure that we are the most inclusive municipality, we need to make sure that our laws are reflecting that. And laws that have been traditionally written and drafted by maybe people who look very different than us, weren't necessarily thinking about these things. So it is our job to make sure that we're being proactive, but we're also protecting everyone in our community, and we're leading the charge on making sure that Providence is a truly inclusive community, and that's reflected in our laws.
Generation nowadays,
Yeah.
This new generation of people. I can name 5 white people who have dreadlocks. Is it called dreadlocks or dreadlocks, right? Is that the same? Or would that also?
So this is,
I mean, I'm just saying, because of the generation being came now. There is so many white girls wearing braids, and there is so many white people wearing dreadlocks, whatever you call it, right? And there is a lot of people who are just starting to hear with like radio, and probably going to work. So I'm just trying to figure out, yeah, historically, yes, there has been something, discrimination against it, but I'm looking at, it's 2023. And it's a thing that we're still in that, where we have our white counterparts who are somewhat mimicking hairstyles or whatever of culture and people. So I'm just trying to figure out how this fit. Today, is this still today?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, so that, I think that's a great, like, relevant point. And I think that's why the language here is very intentional around, so it says commonly or historically associated with. So if you, that is a clause that's in, this wasn't something that we just pulled out of nowhere. We looked at a lot of other municipalities and their language, and we're very intentional about the language. And the reason why that specific clause is in there is so it can be broad. So yes, if you think about grades, for example, that is commonly or historically connected with a certain race or group of people. And there is sometimes a bias towards that. But if there is someone who is not a part of that, that racial group that hairstyle is commonly connected with, they would also be protected by these kind of statutes. So because there is a bias, and we just have to be honest about that, right? So there are people who might say, oh, that hairstyle is, or even when people color their hair, people might have a bias towards that. And that's exactly what we're trying to prevent by passing this kind of legislation. And I think it also is connected to, point P, where, the fact that we don't have anything explicit in our code of ordinances around, sexual orientation discrimination is something that in 2023, we should have on the books. So that's the reason why we're posting this.
One more, and
Absolutely, go right ahead.
just one last.
Yeah, of course, council.
I'm still seeing your face.
That's right.
The accountability, how do we hold people accountable, and how do we prove that we are being discriminated? Do the person have to say that, 15 years, and something, so.
So this would obviously fall, these provisions fall under, chapter 16, offenses and miscellaneous provisions, article 2, discrimination. And we had a mechanism whereby if someone is discriminated against, they can bring those matters forward. So A, B, C, D, those all point out very specifically what a charge is, what commission it goes to, what a complaint is, how we define discrimination in our code of ordinances, and that obviously falls under this umbrella. So there is a mechanism for accountability that's already been baked into our code of ordinances. We're just being more explicit and specific about what also falls under that purview.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great questions. Can't thank you enough.
Any further discussion? Ready to vote?
I'm
Oh, absolutely.
I would just like to commend, for doing that. I think that it's an important path towards racial justice responsibly. And the same for item B as well. I think that it's when we look for ways to push the needle forward for equity, and it's extremely important to highlight, how wonderful it is as we continue towards progress. So I just wanted to be good. Maybe for doing that, and I'm happy to support both.
Thank you, Councilor Peterson.
All right, anybody else? So here no further discussion, I would entertain a motion to approve.
And I'll make a motion. Oh, that
Motion
motion.
made by
Yes.
and second by Councilor Royce. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay, you guys have it. Thank you. Being that there's no further business in the town, there are, I'll take a motion to adjourn. All in favor, aye. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.